The city of Seoul never really slept. Neon lights painted the sky purple and blue. Clubs pumped music that could rattle bones. And behind the glamorous streets lived a shadow that everyone whispered about but never dared to name aloud. Han Ji-woon. At 32, Ji-woon had already earned the kind of reputation that made even police officers look away when his black Mercedes glided through the night. He was the mafia boss no rival dared to cross. His body was a map of tattoos, each line etched from a bloody past, each scar a reminder of lives he had ended. Women adored him, men feared him, and money flowed wherever he set his foot. Yet, inside his cold heart, there was a silence louder than gunshots. That night, after a deal went wrong and bullets painted an alley red, Ji-woon found himself driving without direction. His hands still smelled faintly of gunpowder, his heart heavier than the thick chain resting on his neck. He pressed the accelerator, the city lights blurring, until his car slowed in front of something unusual. A small church tucked between two tall gray buildings. It wasn't the cross above the roof that drew him. It was the sound. A voice. Soft, warm, tender. Rising above the noise of Seoul like sunlight slipping through storm clouds. A woman was singing inside. For reasons even he couldn't explain, Ji-woon stepped out of his car. His men, confused, tried to follow, but he raised a hand. Stay. His voice was sharp. No one argued. He pushed open the church doors quietly, and there she was. Eliana, a young black woman, stood by the pulpit, holding a hymnal book loosely, her eyes closed as her voice carried through the empty pews. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, her braids tied back, her skin glowing under the dim yellow lights. She sang not to impress, but as if she was speaking to heaven itself. Ji-woon, the man who had crushed enemies without blinking, stood frozen. Something in her voice reached inside him into the part he had, buried under blood and alcohol. When she finished, she opened her eyes and saw him. Eliana blinked, surprised. She wasn't used to strangers walking in this late, let alone men in black suits with heavy chains and sharp gazes. But instead of fear, her lips curved into a small smile. "You're late for service," she said softly, teasing just enough to disarm him. No one ever dared to joke with Han Ji-woon. Not his men, not his enemies, not even women desperate for his attention. Yet this girl, this stranger, looked him straight in the eye as if he were just another tired man walking in from the streets. For the first time in years, Ji-woon's lips twitched into something like amusement. "Service." His voice was low, smooth, dangerous. She nodded, hugging her hymnal closer. "Well, technically the service ended 2 hours ago. But God doesn't close doors like people do." Her words lingered in the quiet church. Ji-woon tilted his head, studying her. She didn't smell of perfume or expensive brands. She didn't have the sharp makeup or fake smiles of the women who usually threw themselves at him. Instead, she smelled faintly of shea butter and lavender. And her eyes shone with a sincerity he couldn't remember seeing before. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice more curious than demanding. "Eliana," she said simply, her banter lighting the air. "And you? You look tired." "Long day." He almost laughed. Tired. If she only knew the truth, that just an hour ago, blood had dripped from his hands. Yet her innocent question, her lack of fear, made something in his chest ache. "Ji-woon," he answered shortly. Eliana tilted her head, as though tasting the name. "Ji-woon," she smiled. "Sounds like someone important." No one ever said his name like that, without fear, without trembling, just curiosity like he was human. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Silence stretched between them until Eliana broke it with a playful laugh. "Well, Ji-woon SSI, I don't know what brought you here, but you look like you could use some candy." She reached into her small handbag and pulled out a lollipop, holding it toward him with a grin. His men outside would have fainted if they saw this, their ruthless boss being offered a candy like a child. But Ji-woon, against all logic, reached out and took it. His cold fingers brushed against her warm hand, and something electric passed between them. He didn't even like sweets, but for the first time in a long time, he unwrapped it and placed it in his mouth. The sugary taste was strange, almost foreign to him. Yet somehow it felt right. Eliana chuckled softly. See? Better than whatever you usually take at night. Candy never kills anyone. Ji-woon's gaze lingered on her. She had no idea who he was. No idea that the man standing before her had enemies plotting in every corner of the city. No idea that the blood of dozens stained his past. And yet, she looked at him like he wasn't a monster. That night, as he stepped out of the church, his men tried to ask questions, but he waved them off. In his mouth, the candy tasted sweeter than anything he'd known. In his heart, her voice still echoed. Han Ji-woon had faced bullets, betrayal, and war, but nothing had shaken him like the smile of Eliana, the church girl who had never touched a gun, never entered a club, never tasted alcohol. And for the first time in his life, the most feared man in Seoul found himself wanting to return. For 3 nights straight, Han Ji-woon found himself restless. The faces of enemies, the blood on his hands, the sound of gunshots. None of them haunted him the way that girl's voice did. Eliana. Her name alone carried warmth. It had curled into the corners of his mind like a stubborn song, refusing to leave. He replayed her laughter, the way she had teased him without fear, the way she had handed him a lollipop like he was just some stranger wandering into church. It was madness. Men like him didn't get distracted. One distraction could mean death. Yet, by the 4th night, his black Mercedes was parked once again outside that small church. "Boss," Soo-min, his right-hand man, said carefully from the driver's seat. "Are we really waiting here again?" Ji-woon's sharp gaze cut across the car. One look was enough to silence Soo-min. No one questioned the boss twice. But inside, Ji-woon himself didn't understand why he was here. He told himself he was only curious, that he wanted to know why her voice lingered like a bruise in his chest. That was all. When the doors of the church opened, Ji-woon stepped out alone, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. His men remained outside, restless, confused. Their boss never went anywhere without them, except here. Inside, he found her again. Eliana was arranging flowers by the altar, humming softly to herself. The sound floated like honey in the quiet room. She wore a pale blue dress this time, simple cotton, with her braids tied loosely behind her. She didn't notice him at first, but when she finally looked up, her eyes widened. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "You again?" she asked, voice laced with amusement. "Ji-woon SSI, I thought you were just passing by last time." Ji-woon adjusted the cuffs of his suit, hiding the way her voice unsettled him. "I was." His tone was clipped, almost defensive. "But now I'm here." Eliana chuckled, setting the flowers aside. "You say that like it explains everything." Ji-woon stared at her, expression unreadable. He had ordered executions with less hesitation than he felt under her gaze. "I like your singing," he admitted finally, his voice low. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. Then she grinned. "Well, that's a first. Most people like my cooking more than my singing." Ji-woon tilted his head, studying her. "You cook," she shrugged playfully. "Don't most people? But I warn you, I cook like someone who loves food too much. My best friend says I make portions fit for giants." For some reason, that made the corner of his lips twitch. The feared Mafia boss, who had tasted the finest cuisines in private clubs, found himself imagining eating Eliana's clumsy, oversized meals. He quickly dismissed the thought. "Ridiculous. You don't belong here," Eliana said suddenly, narrowing her eyes at him. Ji-woon stiffened. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, close enough that he caught the faint scent of shea butter in her hair. "You wear heavy suits at night. Your eyes look like you haven't slept in years, and you carry yourself like someone who's always fighting. That doesn't scream church boy to me." Ji-woon froze, caught off guard. No one ever dared to analyze him this way. No one ever looked past the sharp suits, the tattoos hidden beneath, or the intimidating aura he carried. Eliana tilted her head, her smile softening. "But it doesn't matter. You're here. That's enough." Ji-woon didn't know what to say. The only response he managed was silence. To fill it, Eliana picked up her hymnal book and flipped through it. Do you sing? She asked suddenly. The question startled him. No, she grinned. Then today you will. Before he could protest, she pressed the book into his hands. Her small fingers brushed against his calloused ones, and the contact sent a strange warmth shooting up his arm. Come on, she urged, pulling him gently toward the front pews. It's not about sounding perfect. It's about trying. Ji-woon, the man who commanded gangs and silenced enemies with a single glare, found himself being dragged like a reluctant schoolboy. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, but he didn't. Eliana stood beside him, humming a familiar hymn. Her voice was clear, sweet, and unshaken. Then she looked at him expectantly. Your turn, she whispered. Ji-woon swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He hadn't sung since he was a child. His world had been guns, alcohol, women, and violence, not hymns. But under her expectant gaze, something shifted. He sang. Badly. His voice was low, gravelly, completely off-key. Eliana clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from laughing. But her eyes sparkled with delight. You sound like a bear growling in slow motion, she teased when he stopped. Instead of anger, Ji-woon's lips curved into the smallest, rarest of smiles. His men outside wouldn't believe it if they saw. Han Ji-woon, smiling because a church girl called him a bear. Eliana leaned closer, whispering as though sharing a secret. Don't worry, God listens to hearts, not voices. Something inside him cracked open at those words. For years, he had believed his heart was nothing but ice and stone. But here was this girl, standing in a small church, telling him his heart still mattered. When he left that night, Eliana waved casually, as though saying goodbye to an old friend. Ji-woon walked out with a strange lightness in his chest. The city's neon lights no longer seemed so harsh. Even the silence in his car felt softer. And as he sucked on another candy she had slipped into his hand, Ji-woon knew the truth. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was obsessed. The most feared man in Seoul was falling. Not to bullets, not to betrayal, but to the banter and innocence of Eliana, the church girl who had never touched a gun, a drink, or a club. The days that followed were strange for Han Ji-woon. For the first time in years, his nights weren't spent drowning in whiskey or burning neon clubs. Instead, he found himself watching the clock, waiting for the hour when the little church would open. His men whispered in corners, unsure why their boss, the most feared man in Seoul, was suddenly disappearing at odd times and returning with faint traces of sweetness in his eyes. Ji-woon ignored them. He didn't know anyone explanations. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was Eliana, the black girl with warm eyes and easy laughter. The one who had called him a bear when he sang off-key. The one who slipped candies into his hand as if she were giving him treasure. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know the name Han Ji-woon made men tremble. And for some reason, that ignorance wrapped around his heart like a blessing. On the third evening, Ji-woon walked into the church quietly. This time, Eliana was dusting the pews, a scarf tied around her hair, humming under her breath. She looked up, surprised, then laughed. Ah, Mr. Bear Voice is back. Ji-woon stopped in his tracks. No one dared tease him like this. No one dared give him nicknames. And yet, when she said it, he felt no anger, only an unfamiliar warmth. I told you, he said slowly. My name is Ji-woon. Yes, yes. She waved him off playfully. But Ji-woon sounds too serious for you. You need something softer. He blinked. Softer. She tapped her chin, pretending to think hard. What about Candy Bear? Ji-woon's jaw nearly dropped. The Mafia boss who had put fear in the hearts of hundreds was now being called Candy Bear by a church girl. And worse, he couldn't even bring himself to protest. Eliana giggled at his silence, clearly pleased with herself. Don't worry. I won't tell anyone. Your secret's safe with me. Something about her banter disarmed him completely. His men's sharp words, his rivals' threats, none of them had ever unsettled him the way this girl's teasing did. They sat together for the first time, Ji-woon lowering himself onto the hard wooden pew while Eliana continued dusting, chatting as though they'd been friends for years. So, Ji-woon SSI, she said, peeking at him. Do you have family here? His chest tightened. He thought of his father, long dead from gang wars. His mother, gone before he could even remember her face. His so-called brothers who only wanted his throne. "No," he said flatly. Eliana frowned, her voice softening. "That must be lonely." He didn't reply. Loneliness was something he had swallowed long ago, like poison he had learned to live with. Sensing the heaviness, she smiled again. "Well, if you don't have family, you can borrow mine. Pastor Choi is like everyone's father, and Eun-hai is like the sister who never lets you eat in peace. We're loud, nosy, and sometimes annoying, but we're good people." Ji-woon stared at her. No one had ever offered him family before, and she said it so lightly, as if it cost her nothing. He swallowed hard. "And you?" he asked, his voice husky. "What about your family?" Eliana's smile faltered for the first time. She set the duster down slowly. "My parents, they passed away when I was younger. I came here for school and I stayed." Her voice was steady, but Ji-woon saw the flicker of sadness in her eyes. A sadness he recognized all too well. Without thinking, he spoke. "I'm sorry." She blinked, then chuckled softly. "Don't be. God gave me a bigger family here. And maybe he's even sending me new friends." Her gaze lingered on him, bright and open. Ji-woon felt his chest tighten. He wasn't worthy of her friendship, let alone anything more. But the way she looked at him, it made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. Unbeknownst to Eliana, Ji-woon's men were growing restless. Soo-min, his right-hand man, watched from the car with narrowed eyes. "This is dangerous," he muttered to another guard. "He's changing. Do you see it? He's softer." The other man nodded nervously. "It's the girl. She has him distracted." Soo-min clenched his jaw. A distracted boss meant weakness, and weakness in their world meant death. Eliana, oblivious to the storm outside, clapped her hands suddenly. "Come, Candy Bear. Help me move these benches." Ji-woon raised a brow. "Do I look like someone who moves benches?" "Yes," she said simply, handing him one side of the heavy wood. "Strong arms aren't just for decoration, you know." To his own shock, Ji-woon obeyed. Together, they shifted the bench, Eliana humming happily, while he tried not to think about how her laughter made the church feel warmer. When they finished, she beamed at him. "See? Not so scary after all." Ji-woon stared at her. No one had ever told him he wasn't scary. No one had ever dared. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharper than intended. Eliana tilted her head. "Should I be?" "Yes." The word slipped out like a confession. She stepped closer, her eyes shining with mischief. You don't look scary." "You look," she paused, pretending to think, "like someone who needs more candy." Before he could respond, she pressed another lollipop into his palm. Ji-woon stared down at it, then at her, and for the second time in his life he laughed. A low, rare sound that surprised even him. Eliana's eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, Candy Bear laughs. That's going in my diary tonight." Ji-woon shook his head, but he didn't stop smiling. When he finally left, the city air felt different. Softer, warmer. As he slid into his car, Soo-min glanced at him warily. "Boss, this girl. She's trouble." Ji-woon's sharp eyes cut through him. "She's mine." The words came out before he could stop them. Possessive. Final. His men exchanged uneasy glances. And as the Mercedes drove off into the neon night, Ji-woon sucked on the lollipop Eliana had given him, his heart thudding in ways no gunfight had ever managed. Han Ji-woon, the most feared man in Seoul, was falling deeper into the innocence of a girl who didn't even know what a gun looked like. And nothing terrified him more. The rain came heavy that night, drumming against the church roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Eliana was alone, stacking him books into neat rows. The storm had kept everyone else home, but she didn't mind. She liked the quiet, the way the thunder rolled in the distance, making the tiny chapel feel like a hidden world all her own. She was humming softly when the door burst open. Han Ji-woon stood there, his black shirt plastered to his chest, rain dripping down his sharp jawline. His eyes, always unreadable, burned with something darker tonight. Ji-woon, Eliana gasped, hurrying toward him. You're soaked. But as she reached for him, she froze. Blood. Not much, but enough to stain the edge of his sleeve. Her eyes widened. You're hurt. Ji-woon looked down, realizing the crimson trail he had carried into the Lord's house. He clenched his jaw. It's nothing. Nothing? She scolded, her voice trembling. Sit down, Candy Bear. Now. No one had ever ordered him around like that. Not his men. Not his enemies. Not even the police. But Ji-woon, terrifying Mafia boss of Seoul, found himself obeying as Eliana dragged him to a pew. Eliana disappeared for a moment, returning with the tiny first aid kit the pastor always kept near the altar. She knelt before him, her hands gentle as she pressed a cloth to the wound. Ji-woon stiffened. He wasn't used to softness, to care. Usually, when he bled, it was followed by silence and whiskey. Hold still, Eliana murmured, her brows knitted in concentration. What happened? Work, he muttered. She frowned. What kind of work leaves you bleeding like this? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Eliana sighed. You're a strange man, Ji-woon. You show up at a church every night, eat candy like a child, and then appear with blood on your shirt. Who are you, really? Ji-woon's heart pounded. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say something simple, a businessman, a fighter, anything. But when her eyes met his wide and trusting, he couldn't form the words. So he stayed silent. Just as Eliana was tying the bandage around his arm, a loud bang echoed outside. Car doors slammed. Harsh voices cut through the storm. Ji-woon's entire body went rigid. His hand instinctively reached under his coat, where his gun rested. Eliana flinched at the sudden hardness in his eyes. The man who had laughed with lollipops now looked like a predator. Dangerous. Deadly. Stay here, Ji-woon ordered, his voice low, sharp as a blade. Wait. What's happening? Eliana whispered, fear flickering in her chest. Nothing you need to know. Before she could stop him, he strode to the door, yanking it open. The storm swallowed him whole. Eliana's curiosity betrayed her. She crept toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek. Her heart nearly stopped. For men stood outside in the rain, armed and shouting. They looked furious, cornering Ji-woon. But Ji-woon didn't look afraid. He moved with lethal grace, his body a blur in the downpour. A punch, a kick, a slam. One man went down, then another. The crack of bones mixed with thunder. And then the flash of metal. A gun. Eliana clapped her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. She had never seen one in real life. Never thought she'd watch a man hold it like it was part of his own skin. Ji-woon's expression was terrifyingly calm as he disarmed the attacker, the weapon now gleaming in his own hand. He pressed it against the thug's forehead, speaking words Eliana couldn't hear over the storm. The man trembled, nodded furiously, and scrambled away with his companions, disappearing into the night. Ji-woon lowered the gun slowly, his chest heaving. For a moment, his silhouette looked carved out of shadow, a man sculpted by violence. Eliana stumbled back from the window, her heart racing. This was no ordinary man. The church door creaked open. Ji-woon stepped inside, shaking the rain from his hair. His eyes landed on Eliana immediately. She was standing stiff, her hands clutching the hymn book she had been arranging earlier. She had seen. He could tell. Eliana, he said quietly, his voice almost pleading. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Who are you? For the first time, Ji-woon had no answer. He wanted to tell her everything, about the empire built on blood, about the enemies waiting to destroy him. But the words stuck in his throat. If he told her, he would drag her into the darkness with him. And she didn't belong there. She was light. So he said nothing. Instead, he stepped closer, his wet boots echoing against the chapel floor. He reached out slowly, almost afraid. His fingers brushed against hers, gentle. Eliana, he whispered. I won't let anyone hurt you. She stared at him, her heart caught between fear and something she couldn't name. He wasn't a simple man who liked candy. He wasn't just a lonely soul. He was dangerous, deadly. But in his eyes, in that moment, she saw a crack in the armor. a wounded man desperate to protect something pure. And against all reason, Eliana didn't pull her hand away. After Jiwoon left, Eliana sat in the empty church, the storm still raging outside. Her mind raced. She should stay away from him. He was trouble. She had seen enough to know. But her heart, her foolish, tender heart, whispered something else. Maybe God had sent him here for a reason. Maybe even the most dangerous man in Seoul needed saving. And maybe she was the one meant to save him. The storm had passed by morning, but the memory of it lingered inside Eliana. She sat by her small kitchen window, stirring a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from what she had seen the night before. Jiwoon, fists moving like weapons, gun pressed to a man's head, eyes empty of fear. It had all replayed in her dreams, chasing her through the night. And yet, confusingly, what haunted her most wasn't the violence, but the way he had looked at her afterward. The way his voice had softened when he promised, "I won't let anyone hurt you." Her chest ached at the memory. Eliana shook her head furiously, pressing her palms against her cheeks. "This is crazy," she whispered to herself. "He's dangerous. Stay away from him, Eliana. Stay away." But when her phone buzzed and lit up with a single message, her heart betrayed her. "Jiwoon, are you at the church tonight?" Her lips parted. For a full minute she only stared at the words, her heart hammering. Then, without meaning to, her fingers typed back. "Eliana, yes." That night, she arrived at the chapel early, lighting candles along the aisle. She told herself she wasn't waiting for him. She told herself she was simply there to prepare for tomorrow's youth choir practice. But when the door opened and Jiwoon walked in, tall and composed in another dark suit, her breath caught anyway. "Eliana," he greeted softly, like her name alone steadied him. "Jiwoon." She tried to sound casual, but her voice wavered. They stood in silence for a moment, the faint flicker of candles between them. Finally, she blurted out the question that had gnawed at her all day. "Why do you fight like that? Why do men come after you with guns?" His jaw tightened. "That's not something you need to know." "I do need to know," she snapped, surprising both of them. Her eyes burned as she stepped closer. "If you keep showing up here, if you keep pulling me into your world, I deserve to know what I'm dealing with." Jiwoon stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. He wasn't used to being challenged. No one raised their voice at him and lived comfortably afterward. But Eliana, her defiance wasn't threatening. It was honest. "You wouldn't understand," he said finally, his voice low. "Try me." Something in her tone pierced him. Jiwoon took a slow breath, then spoke. "My world is built on blood," he admitted. "I lead men who only understand power. I've done things you can't even imagine. If you were smart, you'd never let me walk through those doors again." Eliana's throat went dry. The words confirmed what she had feared, but also explained everything. The darkness in his eyes, the bandages, the way he moved like a predator at night. She should have run. She should have screamed. But instead, she whispered, "Then why come here?" Jiwoon's gaze softened, almost painfully. "Because when I hear you sing, the blood on my hands feels lighter." Eliana's breath hitched. For a long moment, the chapel was silent, broken only by the flicker of flames. "You scare me, Jiwoon," she admitted, her voice trembling. His lips parted slightly, his chest tightening. "I know. But," she continued, her voice soft but steady, "you also make me feel seen, and I don't understand why." Jiwoon's hand twitched at his side, fighting the urge to reach for her, to pull her close. Instead, he took one step forward, closing the distance just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Eliana," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion he didn't recognize. "If you ever tell me to leave, I will, even if it kills me." Her heart ached at the raw honesty in his tone. She had never met anyone like him. Terrifying yet vulnerable, dangerous yet desperate for something pure. And without meaning to, she reached up and touched his sleeve, right over the fresh bandage. "Stay," she whispered. For the first time in years, Ji-woon sat inside a church without the weight of enemies or guns pressing into his mind. He sat beside Eliana as she sang softly, her voice filling the space with gentle warmth. He didn't sing, not this time. He only listened, his eyes half closed, as though trying to memorize the sound forever. And Eliana, despite the fear still curling in her stomach, found herself glancing at him between verses. The Mafia boss, the candy bear, the man whose mask had slipped, just enough for her to glimpse the wounded soul beneath. She knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't help it. Something about Ji-woon pulled her closer, like a tide she couldn't resist. And for the first time, she admitted to herself, maybe she didn't want to resist anymore. The first rumor spread quicker than wildfire. By the second week, whispers curled through Seoul's underworld like smoke. Han Ji-woon, the cold, untouchable mafia boss who never bowed to anyone, was suddenly being seen near a church girl, a black woman, a foreigner, someone who didn't belong in their world of blood and fear. His men didn't dare voice it at first. They watched quietly as Ji-woon's routines shifted. The man who once spent nights in exclusive clubs now disappeared into that little chapel on the hill. The man who drowned stress in whiskey now carried lollipops in his pocket, slipping one into his mouth whenever he was restless. All because of her. Eliana, Soo-min, Ji-woon's right-hand man, finally broke the silence one night. "Boss," he began carefully, watching Ji-woon through the rearview mirror as they drove. "You've been different lately." Ji-woon's sharp gaze flicked upward. "Different?" "Yes," Soo-min said slowly. "You don't drink. You don't call the girls at the clubs. You're softer." The word hung in the air like a forbidden curse. Ji-woon's jaw tightened, his voice dropping low. "Do you have a problem with that?" Soo-min swallowed hard. "No, boss. Never." But the thought lingered. If their enemies discovered this weakness, this girl, she could become the perfect target. Eliana felt it too. One evening, as she left the church after practice, she noticed shadows trailing behind her. Men watching from across the street. Men who didn't belong in the quiet neighborhood. Before fear could fully take root, Ji-woon appeared. His black car slid up beside her, the door opening with smooth precision. His eyes, sharp, dangerous, scanned the street before settling on her. "Get in," he ordered. "Ji-woon. Now, Eliana." She obeyed, slipping into the leather seat. Her heart pounded as the car pulled away. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing you need to worry about," he muttered, his gaze hard on the passing streets. "They won't touch you." Her hands gripped the hem of her dress tightly. "They were watching me, weren't they?" Ji-woon didn't answer, which was answer enough. Eliana turned to him, her voice breaking. "This is what it means, isn't it? Being near you? Danger following me home." His hands clenched on the wheel. For once, the ruthless boss had no control. "Eliana," his voice softened, almost breaking. "If I could keep you safe by staying away, I would. But I can't." His eyes flicked to her, dark with need. "I don't know how to let you go." Her breath caught. Fear and something else, something warmer, tangled inside her chest. Later that night, inside the safety of the chapel, Eliana finally let her frustration spill. "Ji-woon," she whispered harshly, standing in the aisle with her arms folded. "I'm not blind. I saw the way they looked at me. I saw the way you looked at them. If you keep pulling me into your world, I'll be destroyed. Do you understand that?" Ji-woon stood frozen, his tall frame tense. He had faced guns without flinching, but her trembling voice made him feel powerless. "Then tell me to leave," he said hoarsely. "Tell me never to come back, and I will." Eliana's lips parted. She wanted to say it. She wanted to scream it, but her throat tightened, and instead, tears stung her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. Ji-woon's chest heaved. In 2 strides he was in front of her, his hand lifting slowly, almost reverently, to wipe away a tear with his thumb. His touch was featherlight, as if he were afraid she would shatter beneath his fingers. "I'll protect you," he murmured, "even if it costs me everything." Eliana closed her eyes, torn between fear and surrender. Her whole life had been simple, pure, safe. Yet this man, this dangerous, ruthless man, made her feel alive in ways she didn't understand. That night, Ji-woon gathered his men. They stood in the dim warehouse, the air thick with tension. "This girl," he said, his voice commanding. "Eliana. She is under my protection. Anyone who touches her, anyone who even looks at her the wrong way," his eyes burned with fury, "will answer to me." His men exchanged uneasy glances. A mafia boss protecting a church girl? It was unheard of, but no one dared challenge him. Sumin, however, caught the look in Ji-woon's eyes. It wasn't just protection. It was obsession. And obsession could destroy even the strongest king. Meanwhile, Eliana knelt inside the empty church, her hands clasped tightly. "God!" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What am I doing? I should stay away from him. He's dangerous. But why does my heart refuse to let him go?" Her voice cracked as tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't know if she was praying for strength to leave him, or for the courage to love him anyway. And somewhere in the shadows, Ji-woon stood silently by the door, listening. His chest ached at her words, at the purity in her trembling prayer. He wanted to step forward, to promise her everything. But for once, Han Ji-woon, the feared mafia boss, stayed still. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if love was a gift or a curse. The night soul burned with whispers. Every rival gang, every enemy who had once hidden in the shadows, now knew the same truth. Han Ji-woon had a weakness, and her name was Eliana. By the time Ji-woon stepped out of his black Mercedes that evening, Sumin was already waiting with tense eyes. "They've moved," he said. "They're planning something. Not just against you, boss. Against her." Ji-woon's jaw clenched so hard it ached. His worst fear was coming alive. "Where is she now?" "At the church." Without another word, Ji-woon slammed the car door and stormed into the rain-soaked night. Eliana had stayed late, rearranging flowers and wiping pews. She had convinced herself it was simply to keep busy. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was waiting. For him. The candles flickered warmly as thunder rumbled outside. She hummed softly, trying to chase away the unease curling in her stomach. Then the door creaked open. But it wasn't Ji-woon. For men stepped inside, their eyes cold, their steps heavy. Eliana froze, her breath catching. "Can I help you?" she whispered, clutching the hymn book to her chest like a shield. The tallest one smirked. "So you're the girl." Her blood ran cold. "You don't belong here," another sneered, advancing slowly. "And you don't belong to him. But if he cares this much," he grinned wickedly, "then maybe we should teach him what happens when kings get soft." Eliana's heart raced. She backed away until her knees hit the altar. "Please don't." But before the men could touch her, the storm outside split with the sound of a door slamming open. "Touch her, and you die." The voice was steel, deadly. Han Ji-woon. He moved like a storm unleashed. His fists cracked against jaws. His boots slammed into ribs. His body flowed with lethal precision. The men had come prepared. Knives, chains, even a gun. But against Ji-woon, they were nothing. Still, the chapel became chaos. Candles toppled, pews splintered, blood stained the sacred floor. Eliana screamed as one of the men grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward as a shield. Ji-woon froze, his gun raised, his eyes blazing. "Drop it!" the thug snarled, pressing a blade to Eliana's throat. Ji-woon's finger tightened on the trigger, his entire body trembling with fury. One wrong move and she would bleed. "Eliana," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Her wide eyes met his, and in that instant, she did something she didn't understand herself. She elbowed the thug hard, breaking free just enough for Ji-woon to fire. The man dropped. The others fled into the storm, leaving the chapel in ruins. Ji-woon rushed forward, grabbing Eliana by the shoulders, scanning her frantically for wounds. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ji-woon." And then she collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her tightly, his own chest heaving with ragged breaths. For years, Ji-woon had faced death without flinching. But tonight, holding her trembling body, he had felt true fear for the first time. "I should have stayed away," he rasped, burying his face in her braids. "I should have never brought you into this." Eliana shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her voice breaking. "Yes, you're dangerous. Yes, your world terrifies me. But Ji-woon, I can't walk away." His eyes burned, the ice inside him finally shattering. "Eliana, I don't know if it's God or madness," she whispered, her hand pressed over his heart. "But I feel it. I was meant to meet you, even if it costs me everything." Ji-woon's breath caught. His hand rose slowly, cupping her face with a tenderness that felt foreign even to him. "Eliana," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I've killed for less. I've destroyed men for less. But you," his forehead pressed to hers, "you make me want to be more than a monster." Her tears glistened as she smiled weakly. "Then be more. For me." And in that ruined chapel, surrounded by broken pews and bloodstains, the ruthless mafia boss kissed the church girl with trembling reverence. Not hunger, not dominance, but desperation and love. Later, when the silence returned, Eliana sat with Ji-woon on the chapel steps, her hand still in his. The rain had softened into a drizzle, washing the blood into the streets. "What now?" she whispered. Ji-woon's gaze was distant, but his voice was firm. "Now, I burn down everything that threatens you. If I have to end this empire, I will. You come first." Her heart swelled and broke at the same time, because she knew what that meant. War. More blood. But when he turned to her, his eyes full of raw devotion, she didn't pull away. "I don't want your empire, Ji-woon," she whispered. "I just want you, candy bear and all." For the first time in his life, Han Ji-woon let out a shaky laugh. Not cruel, not mocking, but real. And as the dawn broke over Seoul, painting the sky in gold, the mafia boss and the church girl sat side by side, knowing the storm wasn't over. But they also knew this, whatever came next, they would face it together. Because against all odds, light had chosen to love fire.
Hello besties, thank you for joining us on this journey. Your hearts have felt theirs, their love is yours now, and the story is only getting deeper. Stay tuned, the next chapter awaits. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.